Very good.
Recording in progress.
You set? Okay. Welcome, everyone. It's Monday, June 24th, 2024. It's time for our regularly scheduled city council meeting. Clerk would certify the meeting notice, please.
This meeting has been noticed in accordance with Idaho Code 74-204.
Clerk, call the roll.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Here.
Councilmember Page?
Here.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Here. Thank you. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is changes to the agenda. See any? Move on to the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move to approve the consent agenda as written.
Second. Got a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. Move down to special business. Item 1 is authorize me to reappoint Adam Reno to the Garden City Urban Renewal Agency Board for a 5-year term.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we authorize your reappointment of Adam Reno to the Urban Renewal Agency for a 5-year term through 6/24/2029.
Second.
Thank you. Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
could I get a little background? I'm not familiar with Mr. Reno.
Mr. Reno has been on the board for 5 years. He is he's IT.
He's IT manager for the city of Boise.
IT manager for the city of Boise. Lives in town, been a real asset to the agency, just from his personal background, understands governmental processes, which is value.
No, I think he's a very active and important, respected member of the district.
Thank you.
You bet. And for the benefit of the audience that are curious, Councilmember Jacobs is a member of the Garden City Urban Renewal Board as well. Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. Next item is DSR FY 2024-0003. This is an objection to the design review approval for this application at 5003 Allworth Street. Few housekeeping items before we hear this item. First of all, does the council have any ex parte communication you need to report on this item?
None for me.
No, sir.
None, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, anybody have a conflict of interest? It's would cloud your ability to act on this.
No.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. In order to preserve the record on this item, since there is an objection to a design review approval, we're going to hear this item tonight de novo. And what that means is we'll treat it like a new application. You can, those in the public that wish to testify can do so. Normally, on a standard appeal of a decision, we hear it non-de novo, which means the decision is made based on the record that was established by whoever made the decision originally. But this evening. Unless there's an objection, we're going to hear it non de novo, so the folks that are here that wish to testify can do so.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I'd like to actually correct the record. I just recalled something that could be interpreted as ex parte communication. So anyway, I received communication from a gentleman wanting information about the ownership of this project. And I just referred, I pointed that gentleman to the affidavit of legal interest that's found in the packet. No other discussion.
okay. Thank you, in good shape, thank you. For the benefit of the crowd, ex parte really means having a discussion that could influence a decision maker outside of a public meeting. So if there is a communication with someone who has an interest in the project outside of the meeting, it's the obligation of the decision maker to disclose that. To ensure, so they can ensure or declare whether they've been prejudiced at all by that communication. So, so that's why we do that. Okay, the order of business tonight will be, we will hear from those that are bringing the appeal. You can present your objections. I think there are two parties. After those folks state their objections to the approval and why you think that the approval was made in error, then the respondent or the original applicant will address the council. After that, we'll get a clarifying opportunity for our city staff. Following that, we'll open the hearing portion and let anyone who wants to testify regarding this do so. Following the public testimony, those that brought the appeal, the appellants, will have an opportunity to have a final word. After that, we'll close the hearing. The council will deliberate and make a decision. Okay. So who's here representing the people that are appealing the decision? Yes, ma'am. Okay. One of you can come up here. It doesn't matter which one comes first. Okay. Let us know your name and address, sir, and if you're representing yourself or the homeowners association.
Yes, my name's Jeff Ewer, and I live at 5062 Allworth Street. And I represent the Allworth HOA. We are 16 townhouse complex that's across the street from the parcel. And we voted unanimously in favor of the parcel of the approval at 60 units and a ceiling height of 3 floors of wood over 2 floors or over a single floor of concrete. And the reason that we arrived at that was we didn't want to haul up any NIMBY statutes. We wanted to be YIMBY. And existing right now, excuse me, on the parcel, it is a refuge for storage of machinery. There's at least 15 pieces of machinery that are stored there. They use the back portion of it as a garage. There are multiple areas where they've gone ahead and we believe that they've buried all kinds of oil and whatever kind of other stuff. They've got a portable body on there. And we want to make sure that it's developed, but we want to make sure it's developed properly. So in looking at it with the size and the circumference of the building and it being 90-some feet high, we just thought it was an oversized for the size of the property. The property is 1.57 acres. if you take the setbacks in on the two sides that are opposite the street, which is Allworth and 50th Street, and you use the actual Alta survey, you'll end up finding out that part of that survey extends onto the existing parcels on either side that had been in existence for 15 years. So through eminent domain, you're not going to be able to go back and claim that. One of them side has got a, one of the sides has got a chain link and the other one's got a utility ditch, which is something that on the opposite in picture, looking across the street from the police department, and you're walking down 50th Street, and on the left-hand side, we've got an irrigation district, V ditch, and on the left-hand side of the irrigation V ditch, we've got 30-foot power poles that run all the way down there. And those power poles, from what they report, put the building like 8 to 10 feet. And they have to have at least 15 feet of clearance in order because it's a 50 kV line. Well, if you go down a little bit further, the access on 50th Street is across what we now know to be city ground. It's a little strip of land that the city got when the airport map was issued. And 50th Street runs there, the 8 to 10 feet that's on the side there, they've been running over that to service their vehicles for rental for over 10 years. So it's not like they can't access it that way. So our biggest problem is size of the facility based on what the projection of the size of the lot and its inability to be able to be moved. If the building's got to be moved at all, there's no room. It's like the end piece of a parcel on a closed-ended deal where you've got bounded on two sides with existing facility, and then you got on the other two sides, you got the road. So my idea and the idea of the people that I represent is there should be a dual egress and a dual ingress. One should be on Allworth, one should be on 50th Street. The 50th Street one already exists because that's how they're servicing the property most of the time now. The only thing that shows on the existing map is the Allworth ingress and egress. 740 some could be split. Talk to ACHD, talk to ITD, got no problems with either one of those entities and entrance and exit. So I guess what I'm getting to is it just doesn't make sense, even though it's I say if it's within the code. Hey, I used to be the guy that's speaking last, so I understand. But it doesn't make sense that you can take a building that size that has absolutely no gasketed area on setbacks on all four sides and take that thing and put it in there, and all of a sudden you go, oh my God, there's power lines there, and instead of those being 50, they're 100. Now it's 25 feet. You can't move that building forward. It's going to jostle the whole daggone thing. But if you did an L-shaped building and you did an ingress egress off of Allworth, and you did an ingress egress off of 50th Street, I guarantee you all the problems would be solved, and you wouldn't have to worry about whether something's going to fit or whether you were going to have to say, oh, in the end, are we substantially compliant? This is a big word with the developer. Are we substantially compliant or are we compliant? If you're substantially compliant, then you could drive 45 miles an hour to 35. Hey, nobody was on the street. Substantial compliance. It's not that way with this. You've got a building offset, you got to live with it, and you got to maintain it. And that's why you got what you have right now. Is you got somebody that is trying to take advantage of a loophole in the law And they're trying to put the old adage is we got a little blooded thing going on here. We got 5 pounds of stuff in a 3-pound bag. There's just doesn't fit. All of it doesn't go, doesn't make it in there. Any questions?
Questions? I don't see any at the moment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Welcome. It's a pleasure to see you. If you would give us your name and address for the record.
Sure. My name is Katie Terhune. I live at 5002 Allworth. I'm directly across the street from this project at 5003.
Can you spell your last name for us?
Yes, it's Terhune.
Okay, thank you.
So I came here to talk to you today about this project as one of the nearest neighbors. Like I said, it is directly across the street from my house. What's at issue here is a 7-story building. It's 5 stories of units on top of a 2-story parking garage. My home, for reference, is a 1-story, just 2-bedroom house. But at 7 stories tall, this would be by far the tallest building in this neighborhood. It would actually be the tallest structure in Garden City. Within Garden City limits, there's nothing bigger in height than this building. So developers, the ask that they're making of you is to put that in the center of an existing single-family home neighborhood where most houses are like mine, 1-story to 2-story. And then there are also a number of 1 to 2-story businesses along Allworth. So they're asking you to drop that pretty giant project into an existing neighborhood of homes. They're asking you to do that against the wishes of the people who live closest by. If you look at the public comment that came in for design review, not one that I saw was for this project. Everyone had concerns. Immediately after the neighborhood meeting, every neighbor I spoke to had pretty significant concerns with this project. They're also asking you to do this without a traffic impact study from ITD, something that's required and has not been done. I believe once they do that, it will show a major strain on that intersection, which is Allworth or Adams as it crosses with 50th Street. They're also asking you to move this forward without providing adequate parking for the people who will just live within that apartment complex. So there's not going to be a parking space for every resident. If you look at, you can look at like a 1-bedroom apartment. Often there are 2 people living in a 1-bedroom. If you look at 2-bedroom apartments, of course, there's going to be more than 1 person living in a 2-bedroom apartment most of the time. So not even adequate parking for the people who will live within that complex, let alone a single parking space for guests or visitors, for service workers, for caregivers, or for delivery drivers. So people like Uber Eats delivery drivers, there is nowhere for them to go. There's no parking at all along Allworth. There's very limited parking as exists along 50th as far as street parking goes. They're also asking you to do this without any attempts to solve what is, in my mind, the biggest problem with this project, and something that Jeff brought up as well. And that is the idea that there is a single entrance and exit to this on Allworth Street. If you look at a map of the project, it's very, very close to the intersection with 50th Street. 50th Street has stop signs, Allworth does not. So for people who live in that complex who would be coming home from work, from school, wherever they're coming from, if they're coming off of Chinden, which most people do, they turn at the light and then they would have to make 2 unprotected left turns in about 80 feet. So they'd have to turn across unstopping traffic onto Allworth, and then they'd have to turn again onto unstopping traffic to get into or leave the apartment building. All right, should I, do you need more time? Oh,
Get it off because everybody's seeing that right now.
okay.
There, just clear the street.
I can tell you as somebody whose home is right on that corner of 50th and Allworth, a couple days ago when they were doing chip sealing work on Chinden and they were diverting cars as a detour down 50th Street, The backup for those cars to turn left or right on Adams, and we're talking maybe 24 cars at 5 PM at the time that I was sitting outside and watching this, it backed all the way up onto Chinden. There was a significant backlog of those cars waiting to turn, waiting for a gap in the traffic. And some of them were turning right, which I think is a lot easier than making that left turn and then immediately stopping in the lane to make a second left turn. So I agree with Jeff that without a second entrance and exit, there's no way this project should go forward. I have seen just with backups or with diversions, how bad it can get. I think when you add hundreds of extra cars, it's going to get so much worse. That is my making a guess that it's going to get worse, but we don't know that for sure because they haven't done an appropriate traffic impact study. Now, ACHD has said that Adams and Allworth, the street that runs in front of my house and in front of this proposed project, that can handle the additional estimated, I think, close to 500 daily trips that would be generated just from people living within this apartment building. But no one has done a study or looked at the impact on that specific intersection. And another thing of concern to me as someone who lives on the north side of that intersection is increased traffic turning or going straight or going left to right is going to make it pretty impossible for people on the north side towards the river to get across, because you have to stop at that stop sign and then have it be clear for both ways with no break in traffic to get all the way across. There's no way around that intersection. That's the only way to get from my house anywhere. It dead ends at the end of the street. So you must go left, right, or straight at that intersection. Lastly, I just wanted to say that I think that this structure is giant. It's not compatible with the neighborhood as it currently exists. It's more massive and denser than anything that is currently in Garden City. And I would ask each of you to consider that if a project of this size and density was going up across from your own house, what concerns you would have and how you'd feel about it. And I would ask you to put yourself in our shoes when you consider whether to move this forward or not. In the rebuttal, you're going to hear the developers say that because Garden City has C2 zoning, including the parcel that they want to build this project on, that it's not illegal. And that's right, it's not illegal. But you all are not here to make criminal findings of fact. You're here to do the best possible job for the city, to decide whether a new project would be a net good for the neighborhood that it's going into or a net negative, whether it would be good for the city or bad for the city. Your job is also to look at whether due diligence has been done on the strain that this would place on the surrounding sidewalks, the surrounding roads, and the surrounding residents who already live there. In my opinion, due diligence has not been done, and this project is not a good fit for that spot. I ask you to reject it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, council? Thank you. Okay, we'll get to the public portion in just a few minutes, okay? Let's see, Ms. Thornborough?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioners. Wade Thomas with the applicant.
Oh, okay. Didn't know we had three. I'm
My
sorry.
address is 12,300 West New Hope Road in Star,
Mr. Mayor.
Oh,
Idaho.
just a minute, Mr. Thomas.
The gentleman appears to be speaking about the project rather than as an appellant.
Are you?
No, as the applicant.
Oh, you're the applicant. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I'm
sorry.
sorry.
It's not
I'm sorry. I'm having one of those moments. My apology. Okay. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Thomas.
And Jory and I are co-applicants on this.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Application.
My apology.
Not sure if it warrants discussion, but the kind of the size of the project's been discussed. This is a 110 unit project. It's a 5/2 project, which is 2 floors of parking and then 5 stories of residence above that. Of the 110 units, 50 are 1-bedroom and 60 are 2-bedroom units. The project was designed kind of as a open space on the inside so that everyone has patios, has access to kind of the common area in the middle, as well as we have open space and common area on the top of the building. And then a nice kind of entry from the building itself it's, so I don't have the exact measurements, like 70 to 80 feet from the edge of the building to Allward Street. In the design review process, we kind of did a lot of redesigning. We had different entrances on the front of that street and ultimately went with one access point, which kind of addresses the issue of buildings being able to get in and out, which was something we addressed somewhat ad nauseum, it seemed like, with design review on how the practicalities would work. So in looking at a project like this, you obviously have, does it meet code, but also from on those types of issues, is it practical? So can you really get, you know, trucks in and out, parking trucks, things of that. Moving trucks is a big one. And then obviously Republic Service weighs in heavily on kind of where we put things such as the trash bins and how they can get their large trucks in and out. Not really sure beyond that. It was mentioned, I'm just going to kind of go through Jeff, I think it was, and Kate's comments, just kind of run through the list. So I do think it is worth noting that this particular property is already annexed and zoned. It's zone C2. So there are no height restrictions and there's no density requirements in the code. I think also a big part of the design review process was in discussions with staff, we're looking at not only the code requirements, but does this meet the comp plan and the future land use map designations for this particular area, which includes the Main Street corridor. And this is literally right in the middle of the Main Street corridor. So I did want to mention that because I think that's important. Excuse me. Jeff, I apologize. I didn't really understand your Alta survey discussion. So I don't know that I could really comment on that. Maybe that's something during the testimony part, if we could have them kind of reiterate that. I would like to reserve the opportunity to discuss that more. One of the issues that was brought up was the power, which is located on the south side of the property. That is, with our initial conversations with Idaho Power, we will have to bury those lines on the back of the property. So that won't be an issue as it relates to that. That's pretty standard right now for most developments with Idaho Power. They're trying to get away, especially in higher populated areas. They're kind of transitioning to making sure that everything's buried. So the power poles will no longer be an issue. I think I'll address this one in conjunction with the issue that Katie mentioned on the traffic impact study. We had discussions with ACHD as well as ITD. We did do a traffic generation memo, and ultimately in our dialogue with ITD, they felt like that they do have the ability to waive that, and they felt that that was sufficient and that a traffic impact study was not required, as well as ACHD did not require a traffic impact study. So I did want to highlight that particular issue. Excuse me. Access on 50th Street. This particular parcel, we had a lot of discussion on that particular sliver. There is this sliver that sits between the property and 50th Street. So you have 50th Street and Allward Street at that intersection. This particular property sits on the southwest corner of that location. And there is a sliver, I believe it's 15 feet, and it is owned by the city. And during those discussions, we weren't allowed to basically get access on the 50th Street. We also had the issues of just the distances that relate to trying to access those particular streets, Allward Street as well, and the safety concerns of having multiple egress and ingress coming in such close proximity to that particular intersection. Excuse me. I'm going to kind of move to Katie's comments. This is a 7-story building. Again, code doesn't have any height restriction. I think it does warrant that there has been one other project approved. There are 2 other pending applications of buildings of the same size. I think you also have, they're not 84 feet, but if you move east down Allward Street, there are 3 projects there that are of what I would argue similar size and similar density to this particular project. Parking, I think that should probably be addressed as well. parking does meet code. In designing a project of this and trying to maximize the footprint of that, parking is always a big issue for us. We do have guest parking. It is located inside the structure on the parking floors. We spend a lot of time with staff making sure that we comply with code on that. But also you also have the issue of just from a ownership perspective later, which is something I'm concerned about, is can you have sufficient parking? So I've seen projects, one in Meridian in particular, they waived all the parking codes and you literally didn't have enough parking spaces for people. So when you went to lease it up, you had to tell people, well, you have to, it's first come, first serve, or you're parking on the street somewhere. So that's always a significant issue when designing a particular project of this size. As far as the parking on the streets, Katie's correct, we're not allowed to do that. And if I remember correctly, that was from the fire department report. And as far as, you know, having safe distances as well along that and having people park there with that intersection there. Sorry, I'm just looking over. So I think just a couple of things before we have a chance to hear other people's opinions. Again, this project meets code. It also is in the spirit of the comp plan as well as the future land use map. I think the one thing that hasn't been discussed is this also particular project, which I think is significant, does qualify for low income tax housing credits. That'll be a significant source of our financing. I think that's a huge benefit to the city as well. I think the project reflects where the city is transitioning over the next several years. And I think I'd say the wave of the future, but it is. And I think it does fit into this neighborhood. I think it fits in the vision of the city. I think we also, there was one thing that was written in the appeal about no commercial. That was intentional to kind of help create that transition from all the commercial properties on the south side of Allward, as well as kind of that transition now to the north. I think the other thing too, is worth mentioning that just north of this site, in addition to single family residential units, there are a lot of townhome units. There's apartment complex just north on 50th. Those are 3-story buildings, if I remember correctly, and a lot of multifamily to the east of the site as well. That's all I have.
Questions? Great, thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Mayors and members of the council, good evening. Just to provide a brief staff report in that the appellant and the applicant are providing the majority of the material that is directly related to the appeal tonight. I do want to note a couple of things. The first of which is the Ada County Highway District, a comment is a link. And that is referenced as an agency comment, and then it has a date of January 19th, 2024, if you wish to find that. And while I'm speaking about links, I do want to note on the record and for the record that the staff report on page 27 of the packet had a link that was incorrectly linking to other application materials. The agenda was correctly linked, and therefore it was correctly linked, but I did want to note that for the record. And then going back to other links that may be of interest to the council, the reference ITD transportation information for the project Kittleson technical memo is the second link within the different linked matters with a date of December 22nd of 2023. And then the items that are being appealed or were in the documents that were to be are being appealed are summarized in the staff report, which is on page 24 of the packet or page 2 of the staff report. And it was staff's attempt to take both appeals and summarize what the alleged noncompliance was and the rationale. It would be worth noting that it's already been discussed that the ACHD report did accept the application with standard conditions, and noting that Allworth is a collector street, and for collector streets, ingress and egress need to be outside of the area of influence or 150 feet from the intersection. And the draft decision that's in the packet is in deference to the staff's findings. And where that is in deference is the required findings on page 4 or page, oh, it's not page 24. It's in page 4 of the draft decision is in deference to the staff decision. And the decision that the council would make tonight is either to sustain or reject or remand the staff's decision. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Mr.
Question? Yes. Yes.
Director Thornborough, what can you tell us about ambiguities and the revisions that make the setbacks unclear? Can you speak to that?
Mayor, Council President Page, I cannot speak to the ambiguities. I believe that you're referencing perhaps where the applicant had just discussed the distance of the patio and the drive aisle, setting back the structure from Allworth, or perhaps you're speaking to the setbacks required because of that piece of property that's adjacent to 50th Street.
I'm on page 24 of the staff report. Finding number, I guess, finding number, it's after finding number 5, but it's not labeled finding number 6, the required 5-foot setback. And the rationale, if I'm reading this correct, is that because of revisions, it's unclear if the setbacks have been adhered to.
Mayor,
Yeah.
Council President Page, I believe that you are referring to Ms. Beal's staff report rather than the staff memorandum.
Thank you.
In that the oh.
And it's correct, you are correct. I was referring to Ms. Beal's report.
Mayor, Council President Page, what the city attorney is speaking to is actually my report summarizing the rationale of the alleged non-compliances. And so those alleged non-compliances, that is actually Mr. Hewer's rationale that because of the number of revisions that this process went through, when he submitted the appeal, it was stated within the appeal materials that he was unsure of whether or not that those setbacks had been adhered to. Ms. Beal's report, Ms. Beal does indicate in her report that she believes that all required code or applicable code has been met.
I see, and I apologize. I understand that is a summarization of the appellant's characterization. I see that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President.
Further questions, staff? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a sign up. Thank you. Okay, we've got a couple of folks, three that have signed up to testify. Katie, we've heard from Katie. Matt Allred. You would, Mr. Allred, welcome.
Thank you.
If you would give us your name and address for the record.
Yeah, my name is Matt Allred. I live at 50, I own the home at 5064 North Allworth Street. And I'm here in opposition to the height of the building in particular. I purchased the home roughly 2.5 years ago. Certainly a lot of momentum in the Boise area with all the excitement around real estate, with the development plans and master plan investment the council's made to look for ways, really taking advantage of the access to the river and the beauty of the area. It's incredible to see what's happening in Boise with restaurants and other things along the way. You're starting to get into the game a little bit on 36th Street, a little bit further. I think there's amazing potential with the county parks that are coming. Certainly, to me, I don't think it's a question, could Garden City house a building of that height? I think is Garden City ready to house a building of that height in that location? Right, I think there's a lot of contortions going on right now to really fit this property within this specific space. And I think you're given a lot of reasons not to say no, but I think it takes a step back to say, does it actually fit within this area at this time? I think there's some development of the roads that are required. And could you spend some time in the area and really watch the transit of who's moving through that area? You're going to see a lot of pedestrian traffic. You're going to see kids on bikes. And I'll tell you what, you'll see a lot of motorized wheelchairs along that pathway. And I can say that from personal experience. And the visibility in those corners is not good. It's not. As you access Allworth, the development we're in, and you sit on that corner and you start out, there's just not great visibility. I've been there on a number of occasions and had a garbage truck bearing down at 35 miles an hour coming through that section. If you add 200 plus cars coming out directly across the street, coupled with the corner at 50th Street, you're going to create not only what I think is a burden to the roadway in terms of the volume of traffic, but further, I think you can create a safety hazard for the neighboring community that may not be represented in this room tonight. The other thing I would call out is parking. If you've driven down 50th Street anytime during the day, you will see that both sides of the road next to the police station going up towards Chinden are completely covered with cars, whether it's Western Heating and Air, whether it's the parking for the veterinary clinic, right? And if you put that many more cars through that area, it really creates a burden on the ability to move not only traffic, but move traffic safely. And I wonder out loud is if you really do bring a development with that many units in, what will the overflow parking situation really be? And how will that be enforced? And how will that be managed locally? And what's the burden of managing that? And what's the burden of safety on the residents? As I drive through the area and I look at what's being developed on 36th Street or Chinden or on State Street, I think there's some appropriate spaces for developments of this size, right? I think the argument has been made that you could go as high as you wanted. I don't think just because you could means you should, right? And I think there's an appropriate time to how you pace and space the development. Again, I'm not opposed to apartments. I think it makes sense. You guys have a good plan around nodes of traffic and residents, kind of primary resident locations. I think this could fit, but I do think there's probably better suited properties for a building of that size. Or said differently, for a building that size or for that property, I think the citizens of Garden City, and I think for the longer term interests of the people of Garden City, I think that building is too small. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Zachary Matthews. Welcome, Mr. Matthews. If you would give us your name and address for the record.
Yeah, my name is Zach Matthews and I own the property at 5072 Allworth Street. I feel like a lot of the points have been hit fairly well this evening, so I'll keep mine short and sweet for you. Based on to Jeff's point with the a number of revisions, the last one that I saw had 92 parking stalls. That I don't believe is enough for 110 unit. I I was under the impression that per code 8-4D-5, they had to have 1 stall per 1 bedroom, 2 stalls per 2 bedroom, 0.5 stalls for the first 10 units, plus 0.1 stall for the rest of the stalls, which I'm coming up with 186 based on my math. I'm not sure how many parking spaces there are now with, like I said, with the revisions, but the first one I saw had 92. The other one is in the approval conditions under 8-6B-3. The proposed design shall not create an adverse impact on the surrounding neighborhood. With a building of that height, it's going to block the sun. It's going to cast a humongous shadow down across our house, Katie's house, my house, that whole side of the street. So I'm failing to understand how it's not going to have an adverse impact on the neighborhood with the sheer magnitude of that building, given all the other buildings in the surrounding neighborhood. Those are my 2 major concerns. So for that reason, I oppose. Thank you.
Any questions, Nelson? Great, thank you. Anyone else that didn't sign up a sign-up sheet that wishes to say a few words? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Janice Pierce.
Would you move over so we can get you closer to the mic?
Sure. Is that better?
Janice Pierce.
All right. Yes, thanks for
Okay.
having us tonight. My name is Janice Pierce. I live at 5008 Allworth Street. So again, directly across from the project. And I really just have one comment, and it's out of concern for our neighbors to the north of us at the apartment complex on the river. There is a large population of disabled people who live at that complex. And so to the other gentleman's point, there are quite a few motorized scooters, motorized wheelchairs for those people to access transportation to get either to the bus station or to Fred Meyer to shop up and down the street. And so the concern is with the traffic already being an issue on that corner, that whether it's this development or something else, I think we need to take into consideration how those folks get around and the impact of additional cars in and out of that large project on the corner, what that's going to have for them and impact them. That's
Great.
my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, last call. Okay. We'll go to the final closing. Come on. Welcome back. I've got too many notes flying around.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Just a couple of items. I think it's worth noting that the parking for the structure is contained within the structure, including guest parking. The spaces, what's required are 175 parking spaces. There are 186 within the structure itself. There are 175 standard stalls, as well as 8 accessible stalls. We also have 125 bike parking spaces as well. So I wanted to clarify that. I also wanted to clarify on the issue of the neighbors and scooters, that a significant part of a project like this is upgrading sidewalks and having better sidewalks and new sidewalks. I know it's one issue in Garden City is you look at a lot of these sidewalks, they're fairly dated and in disrepair. That will be another benefit to the neighborhood as a whole. I think the only other comment was with regards to Matt's comments about this not being the time. I make the argument it is the time. You look at Idaho Expo and the expansion there. This is the logical place where these types of projects are going to come in, and more importantly, where they're needed. I think the next corridor will be down Glenwood. I think we're going to see some major changes just between here and Chinden. So I would make the argument it is the time to have these types of projects in this particular area. And again, as I stated earlier, it meets code, meets the comp plan, meets the future land use map designation for the Main Street corridor, as well as meets all the requirements for the activity note. I would ask that you confirm staff's recommendation of this project, as well as design review's recommendation of this project. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, point of order.
Yeah, I'm about to give myself a point of order. Thank you. Now I'm going to have the appellants, you get your final word. So Mr. Brewer and then Ms. Harding. So
Two things were brought up. One was setbacks. We asked for there be an engineer drawing. Everything you got right now is not to scale. And TS means not too sure. It doesn't mean that it's not to scale. It means it's not too sure. So that's where all the setback issues came from. He talked about the fact that they didn't have the ability to turn around. It's because the damn building's too big. That's why he doesn't have the room to turn around, because he's got too big a building. He's got too big a building for the size. One of the other things that brought up was the fact that didn't understand where I was going with the Alta survey. If you go to the property corners, and they are the survey pins are actually on the outside of where you would expect. The survey pins are on the outside where you would expect the property to be, okay? On north side of the property where they've got the I'm starting to flounder a little bit. Anyway, where they've got the cabinet shop, it sits about 2 feet on the outside. He's already put a fence up and he's got parking stalls. On the backside, it's sitting in the middle of the irrigation ditch. Obviously, that's dedicated to somebody on something. I don't know about you, but the last time I heard, you don't pull a building offset from the middle of the irrigation ditch or from somebody else's property or what they perceive to be their property. This is perfectly set up for a 3-story garage under L-shaped building with ingress egress on Allworth and on 50th Street. There's no reason why it can't be done. The city owns the property. I told everybody in the world, tells me somebody else that somebody ACHD owns it, somebody else owns it. They've got control of it. That's exactly not true, and I knew that wasn't true when I looked it up and saw that parcel number 5001, I believe, is it actually is owned by the city, and in the actual comments from staff said that in order to plant everything on 50th Street, that the applicant had to get permission from the city. And so obviously they got to get permission from you guys control. Anyway, anything else that I got to add, I would say that there's nothing ever is done easily. Don't make this about investment tax credits. I want you to know that I work for Rico Brazil and Caleb Group, and just don't make it about that. I understand the financial part of that whole thing, but this is, well beyond that. Anyway, like I said, if we could go ahead and we could do 60 units, roughly 54 square feet, garage under, 3 floors above, got yourself a hell of a program, got yourself a great deal. And you know what it would be? It'd be something that you could drive past and look at. You don't have to do this. And if it's got to be a revision, then it's got to be a revision. Something that I believe that you can all have. Thank you.
okay, you're welcome.
Hello, I think my neighbors have all made really good points, so I'm gonna just focus on a couple of things that the applicant has said. First of all, I am sympathetic that they don't have ownership to that little strip of land that would allow them to put in another ingress or egress, another driveway onto that property. But to be candid, that's not our problem. That's a problem for them to fix. And I'm concerned that if this goes in as currently scoped, that it's going to be very unsafe. It's going to cause a lot of traffic in that intersection. And to my neighbor's point, it's going to be a big problem for the kids that are dropped off at the school bus there, at the school bus stop, as well as for the folks in motorized wheelchairs. I don't think that's something that a bigger sidewalk or a newer sidewalk or a redone sidewalk fixes. I think that's something that an exit and an entrance on different areas could fix. Also, he mentioned that there are other apartment buildings in the area. That's true. There are two down all the way at the end of 50th. Both are 3 stories tall. You mentioned another one that's down, I believe, along the green belt, if I'm thinking of the correct one. He said that was about the same height, but it's not. That's 5 stories tall, and it's on a much, much bigger parcel. So I would encourage you not to lump all of these in, that one apartment means that they're all the same thing. One apartment complex is not equal to a 7-story giant apartment like this. Someone else mentioned the light and the shadow. I think that's less at issue than the safety concerns, but I will say, as the person directly across from that house, I have solar panels on my home that would be rendered useless by the shadow that would be cast on my house for much of the year. I don't think that's as important as the safety concerns, as the parking concerns, as the concerns with density in that area, but I don't love that. Beyond that, I just would urge you to look maybe at a map of that neighborhood now. You don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take the developer's word for it. You can look at a Google map of what's there now and what it looks like, and you can compare that to what a 7-story building on a parcel that's barely big enough for its footprint would look like in that neighborhood. And I urge you to reject this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, point of order.
Yes,
Can I just provide a couple of legal recommendations before the council deliberates?
yes,
Is now the time? Mr. Mayor?
yes.
Okay. Mayor and council, a couple of things from the legal side of the house. Number one, the decision was made to hear this de novo. Nobody objected to that process, so this is being heard de novo, but what that means is you do not give deference to what happened below. This is starting over. That's what de novo means. When you review something de novo, you're starting all over. So you don't give deference to what happened below. It's de novo. It's got a couple things here. I want to remind council of the case Neighborhood Association versus City of Boise. It's 535 P3D, Idaho 2023. In that case, the neighborhood went to the Idaho Supreme Court, arguing that there was not a reasoned statement under LUPA. Idaho Supreme Court agreed, and it went back to the city council. So on that point right there, for the sake of argument, I'm going to say that design review in this context is covered by the Local Land Use Planning Act, which means if the court agrees with me that the council needs to provide a written statement. That's what's required under LUPA, whether you approve, deny, whatever, there needs to be a reasoned statement so the court can review what you did. If they can't review what you did, they'll just automatically remand it back to you. And so if you're looking at in your packet, page 31, that is not a reasoned statement. That's a sentence. So the council, whatever the council wants to do, it needs to come up with a reasoned statement. I don't know if the council would like to continue the matter or whatever, but that is not a reasoned statement on page 31 of your packet. It would not survive this Boise case that came out in 23. Another thing that I would like to make a recommendation on is if this project meets all applicable objective standards, it should be approved. To deny an application, you got to come up with an objective standard that it doesn't meet, and you got to provide a reasoned statement explaining why it doesn't meet the criteria. So again, the legal standard is if it meets all applicable standards, objective standards, then it should be approved. And then, so the council's options are tonight are to grant the application, grant it with conditions, remand it to staff for additional proceedings, findings, or deny. Which means if the council decides to deny it, then staff's decision should be reversed and remanded. If the council decides to approve it, then staff decision should be affirmed. Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
Mr. Wallace, can I clarify when you said meets objective standards?
is another way of, does that mean objective standards, i.e. code?
Correct. I mean, this, Mayor, Council Member Jacobs on page 31, it goes through these 7 criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And then goes on to page 32 with the 8th criteria. If those are all met, then this should be an approval. But then we need a reasoned statement explaining why it's met or why it's not met. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor,
yes,
you have a question for legal counsel. Realizing this is de novo. With required findings of 7 of them. One speaks about landscaping. Building form, facade, pathways, sidewalks, all design elements. And we haven't had that. We've had no testimony about that today from the applicant. And so under a de novo requirement, I fear that we're lacking information.
Mayor, Council President, that's the problem with de novo. It's a do-over. So it's starting from fresh. So, yes, that's right.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
one more question from Mr. Bombs. So on page 30, point 20, it says that following standards apply to this proposal. So would that mean, I think on your page 31, you said that that's a sentence and it doesn't point to the reasons why, not because statement, I guess.
Right.
So could you look at that, because staff did say that the following standards apply to this proposal, would it be then, the application is compliant because of number 20?
That would be, Mayor, Council Member Jacobs, that would get you closer to a reasoned statement.
Would that be sufficient? I mean, does that meet your criteria? Because I was just curious, because there's a reason they put that there. And that's why I was asking about what does objective standards mean? And I didn't know if number 20 were your objective standards.
I think the standards, Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, I think the standards that are applicable are on page 31, section 21. It's those 8 standards from Garden City Code 8-6B-3. And it lists those required findings, but what's lacking is the reasoned statement one way or another. So to answer your question, it's those eight criteria in the table on page 31 and 32 of the page.
Okay, at this point, I haven't closed the public testimony portion, so I'll go ahead and do that now. Council, you can continue any questions of staff and initiate your deliberations. It's your pleasure.
Council members, let's look at page 31. There's 7 items there, 8, excuse me, if you move to the top of page 32. And let's just take turns looking at each of these requirements. Here's number 1. The proposed design shall comply with all design standards in Garden City Code Title 8. Councilmember Jacobs, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, what I referenced, I guess, is again, that number 20, did it apply to, the standards that apply to this proposal? And she lists the various codes within Title 8, and there's a list of them. And so without reading the entirety of Title 8 and whether this application reviewed, I am going on the accuracy of staff that it does based on the state.
Have you heard
That
any?
it meets code, so I've not heard that it does not meet code.
Councilmember Rasmussen.
Yeah, I would concur with Councilmember Jacobs that in my review of all the materials, I believe the application definitely meets number one.
Number two, the proposed design shall provide effective bicycle and pedestrian access and movement to, from, within, and across the site. Councilmember Rasmussen, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I thought the testimony was interesting this evening on this. There was some testimony about some of the citizens that live in that area that will be using sidewalks to get to bus stops and so forth. A good number of them and wheelchairs and so forth. So just as that was said, there was also testimony that there should be two ingress and egress in and out of this building. And right now there's one planned. And to me, one, given the fact that there would be more pedestrians and bicyclists in this area, I'd rather have fewer driveways for safety's sake than more. So I think the one that's planned is adequate and proper.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Let's pull this up just.
Yeah, I count on staff for that, on whether it meets code and safety violation, because I think otherwise I'd be making a subjective statement. And so I rely on staff to say whether the building and their expertise meets that standard. And so I didn't look at it and say, oh, it needs two. Because I'm not necessarily an expert on transportation safety and know what is acceptable and what's not.
Thank you. Number three, the proposed design shall be compatible with or improve the public's use of existing and planned public spaces, including but not limited to the greenbelt, pathways, sidewalks, parks, roadways, open space, public facilities, Boise River and waterways, canals, and other surface irrigation. Compatible with is the required verb there, compatible.
Council President?
Yes.
I would also suggest that it meets three, knowing that this part of the city is zoned C2, that it is compatible. There will be, as a result of this development going in, there will be improvements, sidewalks, around the apartment building itself. So knowing that the zone is C2, and that it makes me default to compatible with the area.
Proper for the zone, is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Councilmember Jacobs.
I would agree it's proper for the C2 zone.
Number four, we've heard a lot of talk and testimony about this tonight. The proposed design shall be compatible with the neighborhood in scale and intensity. I'll start. I don't think it's any secret that C2 is very wide open. So there's no height restrictions or density restrictions. So from a standpoint of code, we can't hang our hats on what the code says. I heard testimony today for Mr. Muir, who said his neighborhood unanimously voted to support a project that was much smaller. And I will say to that point, we're not here to re-engineer the applicant's project, but I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Muir. There was testimony from Ms. Terhune that it was not compatible with the city in her opinion. What stood out to me about Mr. Allred's testimony was that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. I have could does not equal should in my notes. He felt there was a better place for this building, a building of this type. He spoke to the motorized wheelchairs and the children that frequent the area. Mr. Matthews felt that there would be an adverse impact based on size. He offered math that is inconsistent with what the applicant offered. I would defer to the applicant on that since it's the applicant's project as far as the mathematical calculations. Ms. Pierce talked about disabled people on 50th at the river. I think it's clear how those people who showed up to testify feel. Scale and intensity is an interesting thing in Garden City. We're bounded on all sides by other cities or the river. Meridian, Star, they have it pretty nice. You can just kind of keep building. You can sprawl on out there. And of course, in Garden City, we either go up or we don't build anymore. That's a reality. And we've seen that in our current projects, those that are underway right now, those are that are being built. A trip down Adams will tell you that. You can see it. Tall buildings are in our future. And under current code, we don't have a way to stop that. Not a legal way. So, you know, I don't want to speak for the applicant, but I can imagine the city would see lawsuits if we can't back up building heights with our code. That's not good for the city. It's not good for taxpayers, any of us. We have a better way to use our time and money than in court. No offense, Mr. Waddles. Any other comments on number 4 from the gentleman?
Council President, the last half of your talk there resonated with me. I think this project has really the challenge of being the first of this type in that specific area, and let's say that 3 or 4 block region, whatever. But that doesn't mean there aren't going to be more because of just how the economics are right now, how fast the entire metropolitan area is growing. As you stated about Garden City's reality, we're bound on all sides or almost on all sides. So there's going to be more, and I keep going back to our code. And again, there's probably folks in the audience that gave testimony tonight that are mostly in disagreement with our code, but this application meets it. From what I can tell, in my experience on planning and zoning and seeing other applications for the last several years, there's a lot of applications have to do a lot of work after the initial application to become compliant with code. This one looked like it was pretty darn compliant from the outset, except for some things here and there, some small things. But I think they've done a good job with this application, bouncing it off our code and making it compliant. So those would be my comments regarding 4.
Do you have anything to add, Councilmember Jacobs?
I'll just say, so if you've been to council meetings before, unrestricted height has been something that I do not like about our C2 code. I'm personally in favor of having height restrictions along that corridor. And I don't really agree with unrestricted height where you can have as big and tall as a building as you want. So personally, the biggest problem I have with this application is the scale of it and the height of it. And I would be curious, to hear from the applicant of how they kind of came up with that, and if they had conversations with the surrounding community about the height, and did they hear some of these things that people were really opposed to maybe think about making it a smaller building. Because you'd hope that the developer would really engage the local surrounding homeowners and communities about their project, versus what I heard was, well, I just talked to staff and it complies with code, so we did what code said, versus engaging the surrounding community. So I have a little bit of a problem with that. And I have a problem with our height restrictions is like I said, if you've come to all of our exciting council meetings, you would have heard that before. That being said, to my fellow council members' point, that is our code. And so, whenever we have these discussions, and I like to hold up the comprehensive plan, I've got it right here. I look at it often. I'm a big fan of Garden City's comprehensive plan, and I think that that there would be an argument there, but they do comply with code. In terms of impact on the neighborhood, that's subjective. We don't know that for a fact. We don't know how the traffic is going to be, but again, that's not something that you can quantitatively measure. And so usually what I do is ask Mr. Wadhams and say, well, if we say no because we think it's too tall, but our code says we have unrestricted height, what happens?
Mayor and Councilmember Jacobs, I would think that we would probably get sued, and I think that we would probably lose.
So, it's important to me a lot of people, we come to these public hearings, you didn't understand how our code works and how Idaho code works with LUPA. And so if a developer does follow code and they check the boxes and they do everything they're supposed to do, it's very difficult to say no, even when we personally have a problem with height and things like that. And so, because they follow code and they check the boxes, I would say they comply with that statement, whether I agree with it or not.
Thank you. I appreciate how you said that, Councilmember Jacobs. I feel like as I sit up here, sometimes I'm probably the public perceives me as a little bit robotic because I'm going through in this analytical way, checking boxes to see if something meets the standard, and it just doesn't seem very personal. You probably wonder, gosh, does he even live in Garden City? I do. And I just appreciate how Councilmember Jacobs really is always thinking about how this impacts people who live in the community. So thank you for those comments. Number 5, the proposed design shall not create an adverse impact in the surrounding neighborhood. That's a tough one. What constitutes adverse? It's asking us to speculate on the future. Clearly, we can't do that. We don't have crystal balls. The staff report, from my perspective, is usually what I rely on when it comes to this particular required finding. Is that I lean on my planners who are educated and have Garden City's best interests in mind for planning purposes, Garden City's future. I don't really have a personal view on that. Council members, do either of you have something?
Council President, so when I read number 5, it doesn't say the proposed application, it says the proposed design. So I kind of read that as just referring to materials and height, landscaping. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of how I interpret that. And if I'm interpreting that correctly, and maybe I'm not, but then I would say that it does not create an adverse impact on the surrounding neighborhood.
I think that's a good point. And then I hadn't focused on that. We are here for a design review appeal, and it does say design. And we usually think of materials.
Yeah. Landscaping, et cetera.
Councilmember Jacobs, anything on that one?
I kind of mentioned that before about 4 and 5, and it is a subjective. You know, I agree with your statement, Council President.
Number 6, the proposed architecture and site improvements shall have facades, features, materials and building form, other physical improvements that are compatible with or enhance the neighborhood. Number 6 is just the opposite of number 5. So number 5 is, does it adversely impact? And number 6 is, does it enhance? Is there any comments on that?
Council President,
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
I'm just, I don't know if those in attendance know that our design review function is led by a consultants. We have 2 licensed architects that deal with a lot of these particulars and advise our city staff on the process they go through with an applicant on any project that's subject to design review. So that's a lot of that history they have with the city and their professional competency relative to the design components you're talking about. We're advised and informed by those subject matter experts. So it's just a comment in case folks out here don't know where the facade review came from and whether there should be an awning or not, or the colors and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just for the record, I would say that I don't work in design. So just to make that clear to anyone here in case you're curious about that. But, so I'm not a design expert, but I do appreciate that we have experts on our design, our design planning review team. Number 7, the proposed design and landscape shall improve the design and function of the site and be consistent with the Southwest Idaho climatic conditions. Councilmember Jacobs.
Oh, being in the landscape business, yeah, I think it does improve that site from a landscaper perspective. Right now, it's just an empty lot. As someone testified, it's just a nice parking lot for a lot of equipment and things like that currently. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's not, you gotta take scale out of it and look at the landscape and things like that. I think it does improve that site.
Yes, and I would just agree. I think those things as proposed definitely improve that site.
Number 8, the proposed design shall be compatible with applicable natural, scenic, and historic features, including but not limited to wetlands, the Boise River, waterways, and historic structures. Any comments on that? I would just say I don't see evidence that it's incompatible.
That's the sentence I was trying to come up with. Yeah, I don't see any evidence that shows that it's not.
From a design standpoint.
Right.
We're still talking about proposed design.
Yep.
Councilmember Jacobs, do you have a comment on that?
No, I concur.
Is there a motion?
Council President, Before that, I guess I want to say that I think it's great that we have people in Garden City that care enough to come to these meetings and address their concerns about a development that may be going in. So I think that's great and fantastic, and it's just great that people care. And they worry about their neighborhoods. They're concerned about their neighborhoods. They're concerned about changes that are coming, and that is all good. What maybe I do this too much, but I always just really default to what the application's trying to accomplish against our code. So while I greatly appreciate and understand the concerns of the appellants here tonight and others that gave testimony, where I'm leaning towards on this one is sustaining all the recommendations regarding this.
Excellent. And Councilmember Rasmussen, I believe just because we're de novo, we'd be looking at language. By sustain, do you want to approve?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Anything else?
No. Unless
I kind of said my piece regarding the scale and the height and things like that. And I really sympathize with the people that appealed the decision based on that, and I would encourage the developer to engage the community, and I don't know if there's an opportunity to listen to some of their concerns and take into account that and maybe make some revisions to hopefully make it a little bit easier project for them to swallow. And so while I believe that, I don't think, to Councilman Rasmussen's point, they followed the intent of the code, they designed the code. And so that's not enough reason to deny the project. And so I would agree in on the advice of what Mr. Wadham said, in terms of they're meeting the code, then I would sustain it.
So, Mr. Mayor and Council President.
Yes.
So I will make a motion that we approve DSR FY 2024-0003. It's a design review application at 5003 Allworth Street. It's Allworth Street Apartments. Ada County parcel R733416061.
I would second.
They've got a motion and a second. I would recommend that we enhance the reason statement if you're going to go down that path. And I reference Councilmember Jacobs referenced, I lost it.
Page 30, Mayor.
Page 30. The standards by which it was judged under number 20, which has a number of the specific standards that deal with design.
Should the motion include items A through S, which is fine. I just want to make sure I do this properly.
Well, if your decision, my understanding of your motion is to sustain essentially the decision that was made through the design review process. And these are the elements that made up that decision. And if you incorporate those, these elements and their review criteria would make up the reason statement.
Okay.
So my recommendation would be just to amend your motion to include as your reason statement not just the list of these items, but the evaluation that made these items or that influenced these items.
I understand.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Mayor and Council President, I will amend my motion. So once again, it's I'm moving to approve the SR FY 2024-003. It's a design review for the approval of a new multifamily project at Allworth Street at 5003 Allworth Street. And amending to that motion, the reason statement that our design review process considered all the standards that are noted at item 20 in the council packet.
Yeah, in the packet on design review, hearing, appeal, decision, page 3.
Yes.
The second concur.
Mr. Mayor, the problem I have with giving a second is not that I'm trying to be difficult or uncooperative or not trying to move the meeting along. It's just this de novo standard. For example, P, we didn't talk today about flood hazard. Very little talk about waterways. Under the standards of a normal appeal that's non-de novo, right, we would have the record, the document record.
Mr. Rollins may have to weigh in, but the basis of the objections to the decision were really the design elements in the project. Many of these items are frankly not under the purview of the council to really make a determination because they're technical or engineering in nature. So stormwater is going to be one, utilities is one, flood hazard would be a evaluation from our flood hazard protocols administered certainly internally, but that information is based on information that comes from the Federal Emergency Management Agency or the Corps of Engineers or Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, and that picks up a lot of these. So
I would say, Mr. Mayor, that if we are looking at the alleged non-compliance by applicant appellant Muir and appellant Tarhoon, we have density, height, parking, safety, traffic, impact in neighborhood, quality of life amenities not being adequate. And we did hear testimony today about all of those things.
So, and I think in your, just so everybody knows, I don't get to vote on this. I'm just trying to make sure we're clear on this. So I think as you went through the 8 items, those items picked up those areas you just mentioned. I think you had a discussion on those. If you would be more comfortable, we can go through the 20 items, and for the record, I'll just start picking some out, parking and off-street loading provisions. Well, you heard testimony from the applicant that he meets, and what that was confirmed by our planning staff, meets the parking requirements. Again, flood hazard, if it was in the floodway, you couldn't develop it. Utilities, that's power, gas, internet, those kinds of things. Those are out of the control of the city to provide. You know, applicability, purpose, allowed uses, form standards, these are all contained in the standard review that your staff does. Standards that comply with a multifamily dwelling, fences, walls, outdoor lighting, outdoor service and equipment areas. So where you put the trash can, where the HVAC units are located, those sorts of things. Those are all part of that design criteria that our paid consultants look at. Stormwater systems, that's a review that has to pass muster with our city engineer. Waterways, we don't have, we have an irrigation ditch, but that's really not what we're talking about in waterways here. And irrigation districts have their own criteria that have to be met. Multifamily residential dwelling units, there's standards there that your staff has gone through. Prohibitions, are there any prohibited uses there? We already talked about parking, transportation, and connectivity provisions. ACHD and ITD have essentially signed off on the project. I already mentioned flood hazard, landscaping, and tree protection provisions you have reviewed in your discussion tonight. Open space, the open space is internal to the project. That was testimony tonight, and met the standard that the city has as reviewed by the paid consultants. So do whatever the pleasure of the council is on how you want to incorporate that.
I would second.
Yeah, I've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, hear now, clerk call roll.
Councilmember Jacobs,
I mean, yes, I guess I'm saying,
Yes, you're approving the project.
yes.
As presented.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Rasmussen.
Yes.
Okay. No, you're disappointed. We've got to follow the rules that we've created, and the way to remedy that is to change the rules, if that's warranted. While it's no comfort to you, we're in the process of reviewing a number of our codes, and my peers in other cities are dealing with issues of the lag that the government has in keeping up with the issues that we now face with explosive growth, and those that certainly have a different opinion than maybe those in this room have, but are have land use rights. And the zoning code conveys a conditional property right. And if you comply with the provisions of the zoning code, then you have certain property rights. And you can't arbitrarily take those away. The basic land use decision is slightly different than what we're dealing with tonight, which is the design review. We're looking at the design. um, the structure was permitted in that zone. And administrations since the city was created in 1949, and I could argue that with most cities, you end up behind the 8 ball because you can't anticipate what's going to happen. So you get everybody together and you create a comprehensive land use map, and you develop corridors, which this happens to be one of, and you go, gee, this is where we need lots of people because that's where the bus is going to run someday. Or in the circumstance we're at now, a lot of people can't afford to frankly live in a single family detached piece of property. So I know that isn't any comfort, but that's the world that we live in the system in which we live. We've made decisions that weren't grounded in our code and had the courts reverse them. Happened a couple of years ago here. So we're cognizant of that, and Councilmember Jacobs is likely not going to give up on his efforts to affect some changes in certain areas of town. So that's what happened tonight. It isn't because people don't care about your feelings. We have obligations that are set forth in the Local Land Use Planning Act of the state of Idaho. And our job in large part is to make sure that the rules are followed. And most applications that come through in an area where you're dramatically changing the footprint or the nature of the area over time come with resistance. Most of the projects that are high density, people are concerned about traffic, people are concerned about services. I won't get into a whole list of things because I guess it's not germane, but that's just the world that your mayor and council live in, and we've got to be very cognizant of that when we're making decisions. So the issue tonight wasn't whether or not it could be there, it's whether it was designed in accordance with the criteria we have set forth. And that's the agony that you watched the council go through as they went through this tonight. So with that, council, that concludes the business we had on our agenda tonight, and entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I would move that we adjourn tonight's meeting.
Second.
The motion second, all in favor, say aye.
I
I need another aye.
Aye.
Okay, we stand adjourned.
need one.